Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Timeless Testimonies. Today we're going to continue going through the testimony for the church found in Volume 5. We've been going through this for a little while now. It's titled The Nature and Influence of the Testimonies, and it begins on page 654. And this testimony has been so important to set a foundation for why the testimonies are important. Ellen White states in the opening paragraph of this testimony that as the end draws near, and the work of giving the last warning to the world extends, it becomes more important for those who accept present truth to have a clear understanding of the nature and influence of the testimonies, which God in His providence has linked with the work of the third angel's message from its very rise. So again, very, very important. And some of the things that we've gone through that she includes in this testimony have headings such as personal testimonies, object of the testimonies, not to take the place of the Bible. You know, we've got videos that have gone through each one of these sections. There's another section called wrong use of the testimonies. There's also a section to be judged by their fruits. That's a really important section too. The testimonies are to be judged by their fruits. There's a section called doubting the testimonies. And also the duty to give reproof. And the last section that we went through, the video just before this one, rejection of reproof. And we went through that last time. So this is picking up where that left off. The title of this section is called Neglect of the Testimonies. And so we're going to get into that and see what she has to say in relation to the importance of the testimonies for the church. It is not alone those who openly reject the testimonies or who cherish doubt concerning them that are on dangerous ground. To disregard light is to reject it. Okay, so right off the bat, to disregard light is to reject it. And what does that mean exactly? What does the word disregard mean? It means to neglect to observe. So you're neglecting to observe the testimonies. It means to slight as unworthy of notice. So it's not worth your notice. You just slight it. Implying indifference or some degree of contempt. So you just really don't care. You disregard the counsel in the testimonies. And she's saying that to disregard light is to reject it. So you might want to go back and review the previous video, Rejecting the Testimonies, and see what she has to say there. Now here she continues on. Some of you in words acknowledge reproof, but you do not in heart accept it. You go on the same as before, only being less susceptible to the influence of the Spirit of God. Now I'm going to pause right there for just a second and let's kind of really digest each section of this area of the testimonies. She's saying that, you know, you may say that you accept reproof, but in your heart you haven't accepted it. Then she says you go on the same as before. So she's actually explaining how she knows and how it's obvious if a person doesn't accept reproof, because there's no change. They go on the same as before. And the only difference is that they become less susceptible to the influence of the Spirit of God. So every time we have a message or a reproof or area of counsel from God and we neglect that or we reject it, that's basically making it easier for us to reject the next time that we have a warning or reproof. We become less susceptible to the influence of the Spirit of God. Some of you in words acknowledge reproof, but you do not in heart accept it. You go on the same as before, only being less susceptible to the influence of the Spirit of God, becoming more and more blinded, having less wisdom, less self-control, less moral power, and less zeal and relish for religious exercises. And unless converted, you will finally yield your hold upon God entirely. So the only wise thing to do is when reproof comes, we should accept it. If we accept the reproof, we will end up seeing that it is true, that it was needed. The other thing that we should really do anytime we're reproved is take the time to self-examine. And, if we find ourselves not wanting to accept the reproof immediately, at least take the time to self-examine. Really go to God, ask God, is this true about myself? And even if you still can't see it, the best thing we can do is to accept correction, to receive the correction. You have not made decided changes in your life when reproof has come, because you have not seen and realized your defects of character and the great contrast between your life and the life of Christ. Now, she's saying here that the reason there hasn't been decided changes is because people who reject the testimonies that they've received haven't realized, they didn't see or realize their true condition, their true defects of character. The other thing she says is that they didn't realize the great contrast between their life and the life of Christ. So is that the case with us? Do we not realize our defects of character? There's another video we have on this channel called Not Knowing Ourselves, and that's a really good one to check out as well. But do we not know ourselves? Do we not realize our own defects of character? Do we not realize the great contrast between our life and the life of Christ? The best way to come to realize these things is first to accept reproof when it comes, but also to really study the life of Christ. And as we study the life of Christ and we get to know him better and better, it will become obvious to us the huge contrast between our life and his life. What do your prayers amount to while you regard iniquity in your hearts? Unless you make a thorough change, you will, not far hence, become weary of reproof, as did the children of Israel, and, like them, you will apostatize from God. That section was taken from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 332. Many are going directly contrary to the light which God has given to his people, because they do not read the books which contain the light and knowledge in cautions, reproofs, and warnings. So again, we'll pause there and let's think about what she's saying there. The reason that many are going contrary to the light that God has given is because they do not read the books which contain the light and knowledge in cautions, reproofs, and warnings. Now, which books are those? Well, they certainly include the Testimonies for the Church. That's a huge, huge part of it. There's also books called Special Testimonies to Ministers, I believe, is the full title to it. But you also have counsel. Well, she explains this a little further on, but you have counsels, warnings, and reproofs also contained in the volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy. Now, the volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy are not exactly the same as the volumes of the Conflict of the Ages series. The Conflict of the Ages series was written in such a way as to be better received and applicable to just people in the world in general. They don't necessarily need to have an Adventist background or anything like that. But the books that she wrote that we know as the volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy, if you read those and you compare that to the Conflict of the Ages series, you'll find that the language that she uses in the Spirit of Prophecy volumes contains things such as I was shown, or I saw, or the Lord showed me in vision, and that sort of thing. So she's writing that more specifically for the Seventh-day Adventist people. And there's enough difference there that I would highly recommend, if you do have an Adventist background and you're interested, to search out those books which contains warnings and reproofs and counsel, to include those volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy, not just the Conflict of the Ages series version. So include those volumes, the Spirit of Prophecy, in your reading, as well as the Testimonies for the Church. Very, very important books. So that's the reason many are going directly contrary to the light which God has given to his people, because we've neglected to read those books that contain the light and knowledge and counsels, cautions, reproofs, and warnings. The cares of the world, the love of fashion, and the lack of religion have turned the attention from the light God has so graciously given, while books and periodicals containing error are traveling all over the country. Skepticism and infidelity are increasing everywhere. Light so precious, coming from the throne of God, is hid under a bushel. God will make his people responsible for this neglect. An account must be rendered to him for every ray of light he has let shine upon our pathway, whether it has been improved to our advancement in divine things, or rejected because it was more agreeable to follow inclination. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 391. Now maybe you noticed where she said that light so precious coming from the throne of God is hid under a bushel. And then the next sentence reads like this: God will make his people responsible for this neglect. So what is this neglect that she's referring to? Well, she's referencing back to hiding the light under a bushel. And what does she mean by hiding the light under the bushel? Well, you keep going to the context, and at the very beginning of this paragraph, she's explaining how many are going directly contrary to the light which God has given to his people because they do not read the books which contain the light and knowledge in cautions, reproofs, and warnings. So that's the light many are going directly to. And then she says, the light so precious coming from the throne of God is hid under a bushel. She's just basically restating what she stated in the first sentence. That is that by neglecting to read the books that contain the light and knowledge in the cautions, reproofs, and warnings, we are veritably hiding the light under a bushel, and that is a neglect, and that we will be held accountable for this neglect. She explains that we must render an account to God for every advancement in divine things that we've been given, every lack to improve our advancement in divine things. This brings to my mind the parable of the talents and how people were given talents. They were told to improve them, to multiply them, and some did and some didn't. And those who didn't improve their talents, the talent that was taken, or the talent that they had, was taken from them, and it was given to the one who had improved their talents the most. So these are just things to keep in mind when we're considering how do we handle the light that God has given us. Do we disregard it? Do we kind of hold it in contempt? Or maybe we wouldn't say we hold it in contempt, but do we just not really give it the importance that it deserves? Do we slight it? It's not of much importance to us. We don't value it very much. Do we take advantage of the opportunities to read the books that contain the cautions, the warnings, and reproofs? So if we do, or even if we haven't, but we decide that we're going to start, let's keep in mind that when we read those books, let's always do so with a spirit of self-examination and try to benefit the most from it, rather than falling into the trap of reading those things, but then always applying it to someone else other than ourselves, always fault-finding and thinking, yeah, I'm better than that person, because in reality, we are no better. Doesn't matter what differences we may have in our day-to-day actions, we are no better, and we are counseled to always esteem others better than ourselves. So she continues on here. The volumes of Spirit of Prophecy and also the Testimonies should be introduced into every Sabbath-keeping family, and the brethren should know their value and be urged to read them. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to urge us all to read these books and to just try to show you the value of them. And if watching these videos doesn't really bring across the value of them, try reading them. Just do the experiment. Try reading them for yourself and see if you can find the value in the books. It was not the wisest plan to place these books at a low figure and have only one set in a church. They should be in the library of every family and be read again and again. Let them be kept where they can be read by many. That was taken from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 390. Do we all have a set of these books in our home library? Have we been reading them again and again? Have we read them once and thought that was enough? Or have we read them 5 or 10 times and thought that was enough? I think that the more we read them, the more we will learn. Just like with any inspired writing, the truth is deep, and there's always more that we can learn. And we hopefully have grown, spiritually speaking, and in our character-wise. Hopefully we've grown since we read them last, even if that was a week ago. Hopefully there's continual advancement in the Christian life. And if that's the case, when we go back and reread these books, we're bound to see something new. We're bound to receive the counsel that maybe the first time through, or even the 10th time through, we either missed or we decided, no, that's not important, or that doesn't apply to me. So I highly encourage you to follow this counsel and to read these books again and again. Let ministers and people remember that gospel truth hardens when it does not save. The rejection of light leaves men captives, bound about by chains of darkness and unbelief. The soul that refuses to listen to the invitations of mercy from day to day can soon listen to the most urgent appeals without an emotion stirring his soul. As laborers with God, we need more fervent piety and less self-exaltation. The more self is exalted, the more will faith in the testimonies of the Spirit of God be lessened. Those who trust wholly in themselves will see less and less of God in the testimonies of His Spirit. That was taken from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 134. So let's not neglect these testimonies. Let's not disregard them. Let us really receive the cautions, the warnings, and the reproofs contained in these books that she's mentioning here, as well as other inspired writings that contain the same type of counsel, the same type of warnings and reproofs given concerning just how dreadful sin is and how we cannot afford to continue in sin and expect that we will be happy in the presence of a holy God. Now, the next section in this testimony for the church is called How to Receive Reproof, and it's very, very closely linked to this section. So I highly recommend that you check out the next video in this series. And in the meantime, I hope that this was a blessing, and I invite you to continue to investigate the testimonies for the church with me. Thank you so much for doing so. Shalom.